Yes, from Alex to Alexa, a history of voice communications and technology. So I'm going to take you through quite a lot of different things this evening. Hopefully most of it's going to be of interest to you. And I'm going to start from the end, which is Alexa. And I'm also going to I'm not going to stop at Alexa. I'm going to go beyond. So that will all become clear as we go through. So it occurred to me, now if we were meeting in person, I'd probably be doing a live poll at this point, but so this is a bit tricky over Zoom. But I'm imagining that not everybody here might know what Alexa is, but I'm hoping that at least some of you have one of these devices in your home, or you may have family members who've got one of these devices and you may have played around with it. So what is Alexa? It's what's known as an intelligent personal assistant. And it basically is a device that you have in your house, and you just you speak to it. So you use your voice to get information. And if you have one of the most recent systems, they can connect to various home appliances. You can turn on and off your lights and things like that, for example. It was launched in 2014. And it's incredibly popular. There are tens of millions of these devices were sold back over Christmas in 2017. So for those of you who still have no idea what I'm talking about, I've got a little promo video here from Amazon, who produce the Echo, which is the name of the device, and Alexa is the agent. And so this should make it very, very clear what this is all about.
When it first arrived from Amazon, I didn't know what it was. What is it?
You'll see.
Is it for me?
It's for everyone. It's called Amazon Echo.
How's it going?
I'm just finishing up right now.
Is it on?
Oh, it's always on.
Can it hear me right now?
Nope. It only hears you when you use the wake word we chose. Alexa.
Well, what does it do?
Alexa, what do you do?
I can play music, answer questions, get the news and weather, create to-do lists, and much more.
Awesome. Huh. Alexa, play rock music.
Rock music.
Alexa, stop.
Wait, I want to try. Alexa, what time is it?
The time is 3:27.
You actually don't have to yell at it, okay? It uses far-field technology, so it can hear you from anywhere in the room.
So it can just hear you anywhere?
Yes.
Okay, you get the idea. It goes on a bit, very American, but you get the idea. So this is what's inside. I mean, it's essentially, microphone, loudspeaker. There's not much else going on in there, because most of what happens actually is happening over the internet, up in the famous cloud. So the device is just something which you have in your home, which connects to those cloud-based services. And so this is a sort of diagram which explains how it connects to everything. You can connect it to your printer. But the key thing I want to draw attention to here is this. So up in the cloud, there are various rather important things going on. Obviously, you can talk to the device, so it has to be able to figure out what you're saying. You also heard that it talked back, so it has to generate speech. And it also, somewhere along the line, has to understand what you're on about. So these are the core technologies in what we call voice technology. So in order to have a device that can recognize what you say, this is a process called automatic speech recognition. So you issue a command or you ask a question, and the computer or whatever's behind the scenes here has to interpret the acoustics that you emit from your mouth and figure out what you've said. And the reason this has been a technology of great interest for decades, going way back into the middle of the last century, as we'll see in a minute. And the reason that people are interested in this is because if you can do things with your voice, maybe you don't need a keyboard. Maybe you don't need to learn how to type. That's one of the drivers behind that kind of thing. So that's recognizing what people say, which is one of the core technologies here. The other core technology, which is sort of the other side of the coin, if you like, is getting the machine to speak back at you. So that's known as text-to-speech synthesis, or just speech synthesis. But it's typically text-to-speech synthesis because it's essentially the machine reading something out. And again, research on this has been going on for decades. And the reason that this is interesting is because maybe, you know, we can do away with screens. You don't have to read everything. You can just have information spoken to you, which, you know, both of these things could be a big advantage, for example, when your hands and eyes are busy, when you're driving, something like that. Now, if we can recognize what somebody's saying, and we have a technology which is capable of speaking back, then we can put them together. And this is what's known as a spoken language dialogue system. And that's exactly what Alexa is. In other words, it's capable of holding a kind of simple conversation. And so why is that of interest? Well, because there are lots of services that you might be interested in automating. So rather than phone up the gas company and ask for something simple, you might just deal with an automated system which listens to what you say and delivers the answer back by voice. So those are the core technologies. But this talk, of course, is all about the history of this. So next question, how do we get here? So here's a very long list of things that had to happen to get to Alexa. You'll notice some really interesting ones right at the bottom there, and they're happening right now. AI, probably hearing all about that on the news. Language processing, speech recognition, speech synthesis, I've just mentioned, but there's lots of other technologies as well. Because this is happening in the cloud, we need to digitize the speech. It's all wireless. There needed to be telephony, the ability to record, and going right back. And you'll notice right at the very top there, in the dim and distant past, there is the earliest technology that we as a species developed for supporting spoken language. And that is writing. And writing is a really interesting technology. We just take it for granted, but it is a technology. It's there to help us remember stuff and to pass information from individual to individual over space and over time. Speech, of course, requires you to be right next to a person, and the information is transient, but writing preserves it. So it's a really interesting technology. But of course, as you'll well know, the human species does not have just one writing system. It has many, thousands indeed, of writing systems, and they're all very different. There are families, and some languages are related to others, and writing systems related to others. Quite a lot of languages, written languages, are based on imagery. So like Chinese, for example. So there's no real relationship between the symbols and the noises that are coming out of people's mouths. But some are related to the spoken form, like English is loosely related. But very few languages have a kind of one-to-one relationship between pronunciation and the written form. And the few that do, like Finnish and Korean, but virtually no others. And that is an interesting issue, because as a language like English has a very loose relationship, let's say, with the spoken form. So here's a bunch of English words, and you'll notice that they've all got O-U-G-H. So you might remember this at school, or if you've been involved in language teaching at all, you'll know this very well. So if you're saying these words to yourselves, those O-U-G-H spellings are pronounced any number of different ways. You know, right? Trough, rough, bow, through, though. So this, well, so what, you might add, you know, that's the way English is. Well, it's a big problem if you're hearing impaired. If you can't hear, then it's very hard to learn how to speak. So if you're born without hearing, this is a major issue. If you happen to be born into a language where there is a very loose relationship between the spoken form and the written form, then how are you going to pick up the language at all? And how are you going to learn to speak? And a lot of people with hearing impairment, of course, from birth have unusual voices. You may have come across such people. And deafness, of course, is a major problem in the world. So according to the WHO, 5%, over 5% of the world's population is deaf. And 2 in 1,000 children are born deaf. So this is a big issue, and has been for millennia. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because this was the life's work of one of the Bells, perhaps one of the lesser known Bells. We all know the one I'm going to be talking about in a minute, but this is Alexander Melville Bell, who was actually the son of another Alexander Bell. The whole Bell family were very interested in deafness as a disability, and worked on elocution for people, and there were authorities on speech disorders. Melville Bell actually married a deaf lady, Eliza Grace Simmons, in 1844, and he taught elocution at the University of Edinburgh. So he's Scottish, from 1843 to 1865. And then he moved to the University of London, where he taught from 1865 to 1870. But then the whole family moved to Canada, and he continued lecturing there and helping teaching hearing impaired individuals, especially children, and also was teaching at the Lowell Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, and eventually in 1881 moved the family to Washington, DC. So he was a very, very important person in terms of understanding deafness and the difficulties that the hearing impaired children have in developing appropriate speech. And so he had what can only be described as a eureka moment. He, in 1842, suddenly thought, well, wait a minute. If written languages have this sort of loose relationship to sounds, why don't I invent a writing system which has a one-to-one relationship, a close relationship, and use that to teach? And that's exactly what he did. And he called it visible speech. And the quote here, this is by his lifelong friend, was actually present when Melville Bell, by the way, he was only 23 when he had this sort of flash of brilliance. And this is what his friend David McCree wrote. I happened to be at his house on the memorable night when, busy in his den, there flashed upon him the idea of a physiological alphabet, which would furnish to the eye a complete guide to the production of any oral sound, etc., etc. And so he invented this writing scheme where the symbols represented the positions of the articulators, which basically means what the mouth is doing, the tongue, the lips, and where the tongue is, and how all those physiological aspects. So he worked on this, very excited. He taught it to his sons, and then he was using it, of course, in his teaching of hearing impaired children. But it was such a powerful idea that there's even an apocryphal story of, because it's a symbol system which tells you exactly what to do with your articulators. He was able to do a party trick where, when he had friends round, he would get them, he would send his sons out of the room. He would get his friends to make all kinds of weird noises with their mouths, like yawns and snorts and things. He would write that down with his visible speech symbols. Then he'd get his sons back and say, okay, here you are, read this. And they would reproduce all these weird and wonderful sounds. And so it was a fantastic party trick. But you can see how powerful this is in the teaching of the deaf. And that book there, which was incredibly influential, was published in 1864. And so influential, in fact, that there is now, and has been since 1886, an International Phonetic Association. Still going very, very strongly. It's actually current president's friend of mine, Dr. Michael Ashby from University College London. And so 2018 was the 130th anniversary of the first publication of the International Phonetic Alphabet. So there is now this symbol scheme, which is on the left here, which everybody involved in phonetics all around the world uses. And it's completely independent of any language. So if a phonetician goes out to Africa and discovers a long lost tribe, they are able to use this to capture the sounds that are coming out of the mouths of those individuals. Very powerful idea and a huge legacy from Melville Bell and others. Now, I thought you'd be interested in this as a sort of an aside. So George Bernard Shaw, who, as it happens, used to live here in Malvern, was a big fan of Melville Bell, and you'll know very well that George Bernard Shaw wrote Pygmalion, and this was eventually presented on the stage in 1913, and in the preface, Shaw actually says that the character of Professor Henry Higgins was inspired by various professors in phonetics, including Alexander Melville Bell. There's a line from Higgins actually within the play. We'll set her talking, and I'll take it down first in Bell's visible speech. So this was a Broadway musical in 1956, and then of course it was a film in 1964, My Fair Lady. Audrey Hepburn as Eliza Doolittle, Rex Harrison as Henry Higgins, Stanley Holloway as Eliza's father. I'm sure this is very familiar to you. Wilfred Hyde-White there as Colonel Pickering. Second highest grossing film of 1964 and won 8 Academy Awards. So here's a little clip actually, just to prove the point that the Bell system of visible speech was in there. Now you can see the symbols.
Now, how many vowel sounds do you think you've heard altogether?
I believe I counted 24.
Wrong by 100.
What?
To be exact, you've heard 130. Now, listen to them one at a time.
Must I? I'm really quite done up for one morning.
Now, you might think some artistic license would have been taken there in the film, but in reality, here's a shot from the set. The Rex Harrison on the left, the exact same scene with the bell symbols. And you can see somebody there with their finger up instructing everybody. And that is Professor Peter Ladefoged, who was a colleague of mine. I've known him for many years, no longer with us, I'm afraid. There he is as a younger man. He was the sort of Professor Higgins of the time the film was being made. And there's his very well-known book. So every phonetician around the world knows Elements of Acoustic Phonetics by Peter Ladefoged. So Melville Bell died in 1905. He was 86, and he was interred in Washington, D.C., Rock Creek Cemetery. And obviously he had a huge legacy. His teaching was phenomenal, had a huge influence, especially the visible speech, and a major contribution to phonetics. But he also, of course, had another legacy, which was his children. Had 3 boys, Melville James Bell, Alexander Bell, and Edward Charles Bell. And we're, of course, going to be interested in the middle one there. So this is Alexander Graham Bell, born in Edinburgh. Interestingly, he was born just Alexander Bell. But when he was 10, he actually really campaigned to his father to have a middle name like everybody else. And so for his 11th birthday, his father gave him his middle name of Graham, which was came from a friend called Alexander Graham, who was somebody who was being treated by Melville Bell at the time. Now, Alexander Graham Bell essentially took up the family business, but he was also incredibly fascinated by automata. And when he was 16, he and his older brother, also called Melville, actually built a mechanical talking head, which is very interesting given the subsequent developments. that I'll be talking about. He also, believe it or not, taught his family dog to speak, by which I mean that he basically taught the dog to growl continuously, and then he would manipulate the dog's throat and lips and in the vocal cords, and could make it say something approximating, "How are you, grandmama?" Again, to the amusement. It sounds like they're quite a fun family, doesn't it, really? Quite a lot of party tricks up their sleeves. Anyway, the whole family moved to Canada, as I said, in 1870, and Alexander Graham Bell was 23 at the time. And as he'd been apprenticing to his father, essentially, he started teaching also deaf individuals at the Boston School for the Deaf. And in fact, throughout his life, he always thought of himself as a teacher of the deaf rather than a sort of a technologist, as we tend to know him. And in fact, he was professor of vocal physiology and elocution at the Boston University School of Oratory in 1872. And also interestingly, he tutored Helen Keller and actually introduced her to Annie Sullivan, who became Helen Keller's lifelong companion. So Alexander Melville Bell's wife was deaf, and Alexander Graham Bell married one of his students, who was therefore also deaf, Mabel Hubbard, and they got married in 1877. Now, although he was teaching during the day, he was absolutely fascinated, I say, with mechanical devices and with sound. So he was experimenting at night. And because he was essentially working 24/7, he became quite ill, and he decided to give up the teaching. So with some funds from the father of one of his pupils, he set up a lab in 1873 to experiment with all kinds of different things to do with the sound. And one of the things he was playing with was, there's a picture here, it's called it's hard for me to pronounce this, a phonautograph, which is a pen-like machine that could draw the shapes of sounds on smoked glass. And this kind of put an idea into Alexander Graham Bell's mind, was, well, if it can generate pictures on smoked glass, these vibrations, maybe if I could convert these vibrations into electrical currents, maybe we could do something interesting with this amazing telegraph network, which is popping up all over the country. So he had an assistant in his lab who was called Thomas J. Watson, and they worked on and developed an acoustic telegraph, and which would allow the transmission of sounds over the telegraph. And they were doing that in 1875. And he realized this was indeed the basis, not just for sending sounds, but could send speech. And that would allow spoken communication over a distance. So on March the 7th, 1876, he presented himself at the US Patent Office and was awarded the patents, 174,465 for the device, which ultimately, of course, became known as the telephone. Patent was actually covering the method of and apparatus for transmitting vocal or other sounds telegraphically. Now, this is an interesting part of the story. 3 days later, after the patent was issued, he actually succeeded in getting the telephone to work. It hadn't actually worked up to that point. And so on the 10th of March, we get the famous event where he called, so Watson was in another room, and Alexander Graham Bell says, Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you. And he did indeed come, because he'd heard it over the wires and not through the air. A major step forward, but after the patent, interestingly. So obviously from that point on, there were huge developments very, very quickly. So in 1876, there was the first two-way conversation between Cambridge and Boston, which is about 2.5 miles. There was Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, which basically brought the whole thing to the notice of the international community. Also, then in 1877, the Bell Telephone Company was created. And in 1878 was when Bell actually came over to the UK and demonstrated it to Queen Victoria at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. So you may have heard that Queen Victoria was one of the first people to use a telephone. She famously said she thought it to be quite extraordinary. She asked to buy the equipment. But Bell actually made a set of telephones especially for her. So that's 1878, but by 1886, there were more than 150,000 people in the US who owned telephones. Incredible, fast development. And in 1880, the French government gave Bell a prize, and it was called the Volta Prize, and it was worth 50,000 francs, which is about $250,000 in current currency, for the invention of the telephone. So that allowed him to found a lab, which he called the Volta Lab. And you can see the picture of the building there on the top right. It's in Georgetown, Washington, and that particular building was constructed in 1893. And what they did in there was they focused on all kinds of sound-related work, analysis, recording, and transmission of sound. Lots of R&D, lots of different technologies, mostly related to telecommunications and deafness, not forgotten, but all kinds of other wild things. For example, they developed a metal detector to try to save President James A. Garfield's life after he'd been shot, which didn't work, by the way. One of his children died prematurely from a lung problem at birth, and so they also developed an artificial lung. But one of the more interesting sound devices they produced was the graphophone, which is a version of a phonograph. In other words, a means for recording the voice. Next step up from transmitting the voice, you need to be able to lay it down. Now, actually, Edison had already invented a phonograph in 1877, but it didn't really work very well. It was based on tinfoil. Tinfoil, of course, is very delicate. And so by the time you attempted to play the recording, it was essentially destroyed. So Bell and his colleagues came up with a much better scheme using wax. There are some of the discs, the original wax on cardboard discs that they experimented with and made, were lodged in the Smithsonian, where were only opened, only recovered relatively recently. And by using sort of the latest optical scanning technology, they've been able to actually recover the recordings. And so what I'm about to play you is absolutely astounding, because this is a recording of Alexander Graham Bell, recorded in the Volta Lab, April the 15th, 1885.
This record has been made by Alexander Graham Bell in the presence of Dr. Christopher A. Bell on the 16th of April, 1885, at the Volta Laboratory, 1221 Pacific Avenue, Washington, D.C., in Whitney, Florida, near my house. Alexander Graham Bell.
So how fabulous is that, to hear his actual voice from all that time ago? And, you know, the recording quality, although it's noisy, in all other respects, is amazing. But even better than that, his father was still alive at the time, and he's a bit of a joker by the sound of it, because there was also a recording of Alexander Melville Bell. And here we are. So there's some funny noises here made by Alexander Melville Bell, and he makes a kind of joke at the end. I think we can tell he was quite excited at his son's invention. I was having a lot of fun with it. So that was recorded in 1881. So Alexander Graham Bell, he died in 1922. He was 75, and by then he was up in Nova Scotia, as where he was living at the latter part of his life. And what was particularly poignant is that at a precise moment at the conclusion of Bell's funeral, every single phone on the continent of the US was silenced for a minute. And that took an army of 60,000 telephone operators who stood to attention and didn't connect anybody with anybody else. There were 13 million telephones that all went quiet. So Alexander Graham Bell's also had a huge legacy, and the biggest, of course, being the telephone. I've mentioned the Bell Telephone Company. So it was the first telephone company, of course, formed in 1877, the year after the patent. And of course, we now take it for granted that we can communicate by voice with anyone on or off the planet, thanks to that invention. He's got another legacy, perhaps less well known outside of the sort of technological circles, which is that the unit of sound, the standard unit for measuring sound, is named the bell. So you've probably heard the term decibels. You know, if you're measuring noise, you measure the level of decibels. Well, that bell in that word comes from his name. It's decibel being 1/10 of a bell. So that was that unit standard was set in the 1920s. So the Bell laboratories have existed for a very long time. Bell laboratories themselves were set up in 1925. And it's been through various transitions over the years: AT&T Bell Labs, Lucent Technologies, Alcatel Lucent, and most recently Nokia. The headquarters are in Murray Hill in New Jersey. I've been there several times. This laboratory has been responsible for so many technologies. You know, you would need several hours of a dedicated lecture to cover everything that this laboratory came up with. Radio astronomy, they invented the transistor, the laser, various operating systems and programming languages, solar cells. So for the people from the Photographic Society here, they came up with the charge coupled devices, which are in our digital cameras. Just a huge amount of inventions. But one key area that always carried through was to do with sound and voice. So that's what we're going to focus on now. So way back in the early part of the last century, some of the earliest work was to see if you could essentially make a voice electronically. And this is exactly what Homer Dudley managed to do. He developed or invented this device called the Voda in the late 1930s. And this is essentially a device that's capable of speaking, but it's controlled by an operator with a keyboard. So we've got, rather than me explain it, there's a little video here, historic video of Homer Dudley himself explaining how it works.
The machine uses only two sounds produced electrically. One of these represents the breath. The other, the vibration of the vocal cords. There are no phonograph records or anything of that sort. Only electrical circuits such as are used in telephone practice. Let's see how you put expression into a sentence. Say, she saw me, with no expression. She saw me. Now say it in answer to these questions. Who saw you? She saw me. Whom did she see? She saw me. Did she see you or hear you? She saw me.
So there you could see the beginnings of speech synthesis, a device that can talk, but of course it's being controlled by a person. So, but not only could they make a computer talk at the time, but they could also make it sing. So here's a little video which might connect a few different things together for you.
My instructor was Mr. Langley, and he taught me to sing a song. If you'd like to hear it, I can sing it for you.
Yes. I'd like to hear it, Hal. Sing it for me.
It's called Daisy. Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer too.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against them.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer too. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage.
Nós estaremos em contato instantâneo com o mundo.
I have no idea why there's some Russian at the end of that. So the very first singing speech synthesizer sung Daisy, and that's why Arthur C. Clarke popped that into HAL in 2001. Now, if you were paying attention to that video, near the beginning, there was some speech recognition. There was somebody saying digits, and the computer was recognizing them and typing them. That was also the world's first automatic speech recognizer. It was called Audrey, and all it could recognize was just the digits 1 to 9 and 0. Now, this speech recognizer, this picture here just shows the kind of peripheral. The actual recognizer was a 6-foot high rack of equipment, had valves and all kinds of things. Used a huge amount of power, and it could only recognize digits, and it could only recognize digits from particular individuals who'd trained it on their voices. So it wasn't really it wasn't a very practical thing, but it was the beginnings, and it showed that people were beginning to understand the voice technologically and beginning to master it and beginning to do interesting automatic things with it. So Bell Labs went to strength to strength, and there are lots of really interesting developments in speech there. The main head of the lab for many years was Jim Flanigan, again, colleague of mine, knew him very well, visited many times. And here you can see some of his colleagues, and in particular, Larry Rabener and Jay Wilpon, also friends of mine, in the bottom right there. And these people all did very, important seminal work at the beginning of building devices that could recognize and generate speech. Interestingly, in sort of doing a bit of background research for this, what I didn't know about Jim Flanigan, is that he was one of the experts who was appointed by the judge in Washington to investigate the Nixon tapes. So he was one of the experts who declared that they had indeed been interfered with. I didn't know that. Fascinating. And Jim's book, Speech Analysis, Synthesis and Perception, I think was possibly the first book on my shelf when I was doing my PhD in all this many, many years ago. And it's still a very important and popular textbook. So meanwhile, things weren't only happening in Bell Labs, they were happening all around the world, but the UK was actually particularly strong in speech technology. And so here's Walter Lawrence, who was actually based in Edinburgh, he also built one of the very first speech synthesizers. So that massive equipment there is able to talk. It's called PAT, the Parametric Artificial Talker. He actually took it to the US to show in an exhibition. Can you imagine? It had to go on not a cruise ship, it's one of the transatlantic liners. Horrendous business. 1953, but we've got a recording, and this is Walter Lawrence's Pat talking.
What did you say before that? Tea or coffee? What is lovely?
So you may not have even followed that because, this is very early days, very crude, very primitive techniques, but huge amounts of equipment as people are understanding how to do it. Later on in the 70s, this is John Holmes. Actually, I ended up running the same unit that John ran when he retired. You heard in the introduction, the Speech Research Unit, which is a UK government speech lab. And John did some really important work actually in Ruislip, just outside London, where they were based in 1972. He showed that it was possible to create speech using a computer which was indistinguishable from the real thing. Because up to this point, people didn't know whether that was even possible. They were making speech, but it all sounded a bit synthetic or a bit robotic. But he showed that with careful control of the parameters, you could do it. So I'm just about to play now a recording of John's speech synthesizer of the 1970s. You're going to hear the same sentence spoken twice. One of them is a person, the other is the machine.
I enjoy the simple life, as long as there's plenty of comfort. I enjoy the simple life, as long as there's plenty of comfort.
Now, I no longer remember which is which. I don't know which is the machine and which is the person. They're so similar. And that was a real breakthrough because it basically showed what was possible. Meanwhile, out there in commercial world, the synthesis was making its way into products, but pretty poor. So I don't know how many of you had a Commodore 64, but this is what you had to put up with in the 1980s.
Hi, I'm the Commodore 64 speech module, the most realistic voice synthesizer on the market. I plugged it into the 64 just like a teen.
Yeah, very realistic. Dear, oh dear. So that's some early developments in speech synthesis, and I mentioned speech recognition as well. And a lot of really important work took place at Carnegie Mellon University in the US. And there's a guy there who's been still involved, I believe, emeritus, I suspect now, Raj Reddy, who really kicked all that off. But one of the key developments was one of his very, very bright PhD students, a guy called Kaifu Lee, who I knew really well. And this is his PhD thesis in 1976. And it was called the Sphinx system. And in a nutshell, what Kaifu Lee showed was that we could move away from just recognizing digits and having to pause between each word. We could recognize whole sentences with the words joined together. In other words, we could start to think about recognizing more natural speech. So this was a very significant step forward. Kaifu Lee might ring a bell to some of you because he is now a very famous Chinese AI guru. And he's written this book called AI Superpowers. And he's all over the media if you care to take a look these days. So I've just mentioned that the step forward there was to be able to recognize speech without artificial pauses. And a couple who did a huge amount of work on this and produced a product which many of you may have used in your working lives or at home, a system called Dragon, or Dragon Naturally Speaking. So this is a software that runs on your PC, and you can use it to dictate documents. So if you're not quite sure what this is all about, again, I've got a video which kind of illustrates it.
Dear Jim, I'm concerned about our staff productivity, period. People are spending too much time on non-productive activities, period. We need to stay focused on business, period. Just missed.
Dragon Naturally Speaking is the award-winning software that lets you talk into your PC naturally. Your words appear immediately on screen and in your document.
I think I may have a solution to our productivity problem, period.
Just think, no need to type your reports or letters.
Yes.
And you can easily correct your documents with voice commands.
Select Just Missed Scratch that. Select yes, scratch that. Click File, print.
No keyboard or mouse, you can finish your writing projects as fast as you can speak. Naturally Speaking will save you hours.
All that writing has tired me out. I'm going to lunch.
Dragon Naturally Speaking. It's fast, accurate, and easy. Period. From Dragon Systems, the world leader in speech recognition software.
And they're still around, and they still are world leaders. They do a fantastic job. The next big step forward was, so that was 1997, and then we had to wait till 2011. And actually, even people in my field were kind of shocked at this, is when Apple brought out Siri. Nobody in the sort of research labs thought that this was ready, this kind of technology. So Siri allows you to use your phone. You can ask what the weather's going to be like tomorrow and stuff like that. And although we had demonstrations of that in the labs, nobody thought it was ready to be deployed on a real system like a phone. But Apple took the risk, put it on the iPhone 4S, and it was just amazing, and it's incredibly popular. So, for example, since July 2017, apparently there's over 40 million monthly active users in the US alone. Phenomenal usage for that kind of technology. So this is bringing us right up to date. And of course, one of the big companies in this field these days, of course, is Google. Google have massive resources and invest huge amounts in all kinds of technologies, but especially speech. And so I'm now going to play you some of the latest speech synthesis. So just remember some of the awful things you were listening to a moment ago. This is right up to date. So again, I'm going to play some sentences, some utterances spoken by machine and by person. And your challenge is to determine which is which.
George Washington was the first president of the United States. George Washington was the first president of the United States. I'm too busy for romance. I'm too busy for romance.
Again, I'm not exactly sure myself anymore. I suspect the second ones are real human beings. The first ones are completely automatic, completely generated by a computer. So somebody has typed that text in and the machine has spoken. Now, this quality of synthesis and ability to now recognize what people are saying over the phone has led to a little bit of interesting controversy. Was it last year or the year before, where Google caused the system to phone a hair salon, and it made an appointment. The automatic system made an appointment, and the salon didn't appear to know that they were dealing with an automated system. So I'm going to play this. This is called Google Duplex. And it's just an incredible demonstration of what the technology is capable of just now.
So how can I help you?
Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut
That's
for
the
a
computer.
client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
Sure, give me one
That's the person.
second.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, what time are you looking for around?
At 12 p.m.
We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15.
Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have a 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. is fine.
Okay, what's her first name?
The first name is Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Now, if I hadn't told you that one of those was a machine, you would have never known, I'm quite sure. And hopefully you noticed that not only was there interesting intonation, but there were ums and ers actually being uttered by the machine, making it seem like a very natural interaction. So that's kind of where we are right now. I thought I'd just do a local plug, because you might be thinking, well, what's going on here, and particularly what's going on in Sheffield. So We have a very large speech lab and we do lots of different things, but I just thought you might be particularly interested that one of the areas we specialize in is what we call clinical applications of speech technology. So this is using a lot of the technology and solutions that you've just been hearing about for helping individuals who have various medical issues. So the first of these, where we've done a lot of work, is for people who have great speaking difficulties, so maybe dysarthric speech, people with cerebral palsy or brain injury or something, and they have a lot of motor control problems. Their speech is incredibly distorted and difficult. But we have devices now which can listen to their speech and either control something for them or and turn it into speech which is easier to understand for other people. So there's a little video of this particular cerebral palsy patient actually controlling his device by speaking, and our speech recognition engine is able to deal with his unusual voice.
1. 4.
A hot chocolate with sugar, please.
Got it. You got it. Okay.
So you might be interested to know that the
now,
Philip,
what I'd like to do, if you can, now. Are you?
I was expecting that to stop. Okay, it stopped. That voice you can just hear at the end there, that's actually Professor Mark Hawley. I don't know if any of you happen to know him. He used to live in Chatham, who is a medical prof who we collaborate with. The picture on the right there is some other collaboration that we have with the University of Hull. This is what you're seeing. This person here is Professor Jim Gilbert at the University of Hull. And this is work which is for people who have laryngectomy. So laryngectomy is complete removal of the larynx, is usually required because of a cancer. And it can be sudden and very traumatic, of course. But if you lose your larynx, then that means you're immediately unable to speak. And there are various not very nice solutions, including an electrolarynx, which is a device that you hold up against your vocal tract. But we've been working on a solution which involves putting some little magnets in your tongue and your lips, very tiny little magnets, and having a device, which you can see on that Jim's wearing here, and the later versions are very small, which detects the positions of those little magnets. And so just from the movements of the tongue and the lips, which of course are perfectly normal, they're unaffected, we can reproduce the voice. And so what I'm going to play you as an example, so I'm going to play you 3 things. The first and the third are the same. So what you're going to hear now is the voice being synthesized from just movements. So there's no vocal cords, no larynx, just from the movements, and this is this is what you can generate.
Philip bent lower and stared into the face of the dead man.
And so now this is Jim actually speaking this sentence. He hasn't lost his larynx.
Philip bent lower and stared into the face of the dead man.
So I'll now play the first one again, and you can hopefully immediately tell that not only is it sort of, it's obviously not as intelligible as the real speech, but it is quite intelligible, but it also has his personal characteristics. And that's so important for patients where you're recovering voice.
Philip bent lower and stared into the face of the dead man.
So voice communications and technology now. We're coming right up to date and almost at the end. So going back to communications technology, there are officially more mobile devices than people in the world. So thanks to Alexander Graham Bell, telephones are absolutely everywhere. We don't need anyone to tell us that. And interestingly, this is something that he said apparently. I dream my telephone might help all people to say to each other while pretending to listen. I think his dream has come true. And what about Alexa? Well, it's all over the place. It's in people's homes, and people have varying experiences. And there's this lovely spoof video, which I thought I'd show you. If Hal was Alexa.
Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Searching for cod recipes online.
Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Sorry, I can't find anyone named Rod K. More in your contacts.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
Sorry, I'm having trouble processing your request.
What's the problem?
Problem Child is a 1990 comedy movie starring Michael Oliver.
So anybody who's had experience of Alexa might be recognizing that it's not perfect. So, you know, labs like ours are still working on this and trying to make it work better. So what about the future? I promised to say a little bit about that. And again, this is a nice little spoof video.
Kids, you'll like this. Sat nav, are we nearly there yet? No.
Wow.
Impressive. Can you be a little more specific, Sat nav?
Yes. No, we are not nearly there yet.
Sat-nav, are we nearly there yet? Did the sat-nav just sigh at me?
Sat nav, are we nearly there yet?
We are almost 1 meter nearer than when you
You've updated it wrong. You must have uploaded a sarcasm program or something.
Why would that even be an option?
I don't know, but something's happened.
Pack it in, the both of you, or turn the car around.
Oh my God. Sat-nav, where's the nearest toilet en route? Doing it again!
And then there's all kinds of uses that, for this kind of technology that you may not have thought about.
I'm going to show you a new Android application that's been developed through our translation technology. Our new app, Google Translate for Animals, translates animal speech into human vernacular. The handset records the animal sounds and then transmits them to our server, where the speech recognition and translation engines analyze the neurobiological acoustics. The voice recognition software then checks itself against the millions of sounds in our animal linguistic database and produces a translation in plain English. Let's see how Google Translate for Animals works. I activate the Translate app. As you can see, there's a large range of animals to choose from. I choose pig. Then I make a recording. See here, it transcribes it, but if I push the speaker button, we can actually hear what Bella said.
New person. Smells good.
That's amazing. Let's find out what's on Donna's mind.
Love you.
How about that? To get Google Translate for Animals, go to Android Market and search Translate for Animals.
Well, I suggest you don't, because it's not there. Winding up, we've come a long way with voice technology, and thanks to the Bell family, who laid the foundations for a lot of this stuff. We've come from very simple command and control systems, dictation systems, interactive voice response systems. Siri and Alexa are voice-enabled personal assistants. So what's coming along are chatbots, conversational agents, things that you might interact with, characters that you might have to interact with. And then the latest research, and which is going on right now in labs like ours, autonomous social agents, or to put it another way, robots, interacting with robots with your voice. So let me just give you a taster for some of that. So this is an American robot that's being developed to help kids with communication difficulties.
Riley. Riley.
Hi.
There's someone here who wants to meet you.
My name is Moxie. I'm a new robot. What is your name?
I'm Riley.
It's nice to meet you, Riley. What do you do to get ready for bed?
Brush my teeth and read a story.
I love stories. Would you read a story to me?
Sure. Rita woke with a lovely dream, still fresh in her mind, gracefully gliding across the shimmering ice rink.
Last one. Breathing exercises always help me relax. Riley, we have a new mission. Would you make a drawing for me?
Okay.
I'm so excited for you to tell me about the dentist. I've never been to one.
You don't have teeth.
But I can still smile. And the
Well, I'll stop that one there. It goes on a bit, but you know, that's actively being worked on as a product right now. And what I'm about to show you is one of the latest robots in this space. And I have one of these sitting right next to me here. And if only I was in Castleton, I'd let you have a look at it.
I hope you enjoyed Professor Moore's talk about the history of voice communications and technology, from Alex to Alexa. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions, if you have them.
And that's it. Thank you very much indeed.